Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about some organic residue analysis that links the early Celtic people in Burgundy, the eastern part of France, with Mediterranean practices and excuse me, their products and their feasting practices, and a lot of their the hallmarks of their culture are being preserved within these early Celtic settlements. And that's but it's unprecedented to see these hallmarks of Greek society alive and well in the architecture of these Celtic people, the feasting practices, and even the burials and what they're being buried in, or buried with rather. Yeah, so they found this organic residue analysis, and they analyzed it, and it was of imported Mediterranean pottery, detecting olive oil and wine, as well as local beer. And before we really delve into this, we have to talk about the early Celtic hill fort site of Vix-Mont-la-Soie in Burgundy, France. Now, if you don't know where Burgundy is, it's the eastern part of France, northwest of the Alps. And apparently this place around the time of the Hallstatt culture, which is about 1200 BC or so, is when this place is dated, this excavation site. And a few things you need to know is this site is famous for the Vix grave, or burial mound, which is named after the city of, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, Vix or V, I'm not sure, but VIX. And basically the broader site of this place is a prehistoric Celtic complex from the Hallstatt culture. There's a specific grave called the Lady of Vix grave, which dates to 500 BC. And the crazy thing about this is it had never been looted. It had been virtually untouched and undisturbed up until the 1930s or so, when they figured out it was there and they unearthed it. A bunch of stuff came from it: thousands of pottery, jewelry, bronze and iron finds, this thing called a crater, which is a large vase from ancient Greece, a bunch of stuff depicting hoplites and obvious military from the Greek culture from that time period. And even remarkable is the Palace of Vix, what they're calling it, which shares dimensions with other cathedrals. And again, it's inspired by Greek architecture, also known as a Megaron complex. So again, this structure is being described as a palace of the Lady of Vix, but really they're not sure exactly what it was used for. It's very interesting stuff. And so because of the peculiarities of the site, which, by the way, keeps yielding more and more stuff, reading this is a very, very puts this in a very interesting light. Now that you have some context, let's continue. So the early Celts in eastern France imported Mediterranean pottery as well as olive oil and wine, and may have appropriated Mediterranean feasting practices. So again, this is kind of weird, because the early Celtic culture should not have had these hallmarks. They were described by early archaeologists and historians as being completely different from the Greeks. So this is, again, this kind of flies in the face of that theory, and maybe there's a lot more to this history than we thought. So they excavate all these hundreds of fragments of imported Mediterranean pottery from the hill fort site in Vix-Mont-la-Soie. The Mediterranean feasting consumption practices on early Celtic culture using molecular organic residue analysis techniques investigated basically the impacts of these imports onto Celtic society at the time. Other techniques they use are gas chromatography, GC mass spectrometry analyses on organic residues, which were extracted from 99 ceramic fragments found at the site. 16 of those vessels imported from the Mediterranean, and some locally produced vessels from different contexts. So either military, artisan, ritual, or elite. again, just the fact that all this stuff exists, by the way, is highly indicative of a highly organized society here. So, when you go by the earlier theories, the earlier archaeological theories, the anthropological theories regarding this area and ancient Europe, a lot of the picture is hazy and obscured, a lot of portions of it, and the only places that have a high definition, for lack of a better word, historical picture would be places around Greece and Italy and Turkey and such, that part of the Mediterranean. But this part where France is and Germany is shrouded in mystery from what little we have. So that's why when I was on Grimerica last week talking about the Scythians, the early Celtic people are connected to the Scythian people, and it's interesting to see how those early Celtics coming from the steppe, originating their cultures, their DNA come from that area, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains and north of that as well. Primarily north of that, actually. It's interesting to see this intercultural adaptation going on between these Celtic people and the Mediterranean Greeks. Very interesting stuff, and is even more interesting to see that these imported vessels were not only used for wine drinking and feasting practices, but also to drink local beer. So these local beers were spiced up with pine resins. Again, an intercultural adaptation, additional homegrown beverages. So brewing was a big part of their culture. There are millet-based beer that they found that were probably consumed by low-status individuals, barley-based beer and birch-derived beverages consumed by higher-status people. So we see the stratified society. Local pine resins and plant oils were also identified. Beeswax was present in around 50% of the local pottery vessels, indicating that they like to sweeten their beverages with honey and fermenting stuff like mead. So the Vikings were into mead as well. So we're getting a nice snapshot into not only their diet, but their practices and their customs as well. So it's very, very interesting stuff. Authors note that common foods such as wheat, barley, and rye might have been present in the vessels, but could not be detected by their analysis centuries later. Despite this limitation, the study sheds new light on the role of imported Mediterranean food and drink in helping shape early Celtic feasting practices, and demonstrates the potential of this type of molecular analysis also for other archaeological sites. So yeah, of course, this technology and these dating techniques and these research techniques will be carried over into other archaeological sites, of course, but also this redefines the relationship that these Celtic people had with the more, I guess, civilized Greeks. But for all we know, the Celtic people might have been even more civilized, or they might have been they must have had some sort of custom that to them was normal and to them was civilized, and enough so to where they must have had a good relationship with outsiders who would have been known to us as the Greeks, but to them, the Celtic people, outsiders. So it's very, very interesting, all these new wrinkles that are being added between these two different populations. Another thing the authors add is the Celts in the early Iron Age did not just drink imported Greek wine from their imported Greek pottery. They also used foreign vessels in their own way for drinking different kinds of local beer, as organic residue analysis of circa 100 early Iron Age local and Mediterranean drinking vessels from Mount Lassois show. So again, this is very interesting stuff. Again, this part of France is not that far from not only the Mediterranean Sea, which is down here, this body of water here, and this is the Atlantic, obviously, but also it's not that far from where the Greeks would have been as well. Again, this is a very fascinating article, and if you guys don't know about this Hallstatt site, you should definitely look it up. It's a prehistoric Celtic complex. Look into the Lady of Vix, and look into how they're finding more and more stuff from this site alone. starting from the 1930s and onward, they've just kept bringing out stuff. And it's very interesting that out of all this stuff, out of all these excavations from this enclosure, all the buildings that they found, the post houses, the pit dwellings, hearth, storage units, geophysical work, large planned settlements, all of these things align north-south axis, buildings that they found in different phases were largely untouched by looters and grave robbers after thousands of years. So that alone makes this a rare pristine site, and a nice spyglass for us to look through the present time into the past. And it's just so interesting, and I highly recommend you guys take a look into this. It'll help, especially if you're into Celtic culture and the early Europeans who, by the way, were in the midst of their own expansion. Again, they went from Asia Minor or thereabouts a step, the east to west, and it shows. It shows in their genetic migration. So it is very interesting to see that they 100% would have had a different culture than the Mediterranean Greeks. And this is a snapshot into their dealings with each other. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. And I'm digging the comments. And the Grimerica podcast, the episode, not only is it on YouTube, it should be on iTunes pretty soon. So go ahead and give it a download as well. And follow me on Twitter. Share all this stuff with your friends or in your Discord channel or wherever it is that you congregate with your friends online. Go ahead and just paste it in there. And I'll talk to you guys later.